You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today on this March 18th, 2025, we got some NFL discussion that needs to be had. We've got NFL.com power rankings that just dropped yesterday. Garrett Bradbury was released by the Minnesota Vikings after they weren't able to find a trade partner. We're going to talk some fallout from the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins contract extensions for the Cincinnati Bengals, and then something that popped up yesterday being Monday as I'm recording this. Ted McMillan's 40. A lot of conversation about what that number actually was at his pro day. It seems like there was a lot of disagreeing going on, and I kind of think I may have a reason for why. So, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Fire away as we discuss everything. But first, we will dive in to the reason you are all here, kicking things off with NFL.com's recently released power rankings. Eric Edholm was the one that put these together here, and I've got to say, I don't have too much to argue about as far as the top 10 goes, and we'll dive through the top 10 here, and then I'll go over some other notables. But I will say it's a pretty solid list with only like a gripe, maybe two. From the top, starting at number 1, we're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City Chiefs, Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Detroit Lions, Washington Commanders, Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Rams sitting at number 10. Like I said, I don't really have too much to gripe about with this one here. The Lions being at number 5 feels like it makes a lot of sense after getting completely knocked out by the Commanders. I will say that even though the Commanders did beat them last year in the playoffs, them still being ranked one spot higher than them does make some sense to me. But if you wanted to argue that Washington should be above them, being able to beat the Lions last year and pretty convincingly at that in their playoff game, I could completely see where you're coming from. I guess I'm just maybe giving Detroit the benefit of the doubt with all the injuries that they had and the fact that they still made it as far as they did, and maybe that's why I feel the way I do about that. But beyond that, I mean, the only other thing that I would look at here and maybe scratch my head about is just the Minnesota Vikings, because we don't necessarily know what the quarterback situation is going to look like. I feel like the rest of the list is basically, it's anyone's conversation at this point. Like, if you think that the Ravens should be higher than the Chiefs, or maybe the Lions should be above the Bills kind of deal, like, or maybe like Buccaneers over Packers, vice versa, something like that. Like, I could completely understand. I like the Rams being at number 10 because I'm really excited about what that team's going to potentially do with the addition of Davante Adams. It feels like, yeah, maybe you did a little bit of a one-to-one swap with an aging wide receiver in Davante Adams and Cooper Kupp, but I would argue based off what we saw last season and just the overall last handful of years of Davante Adams' career, far healthier, far more available, still productive, and being able to bring him in to Sean McVay's system, if he can give you what you got out of Davante during that second half of the season last year when he went to the Jets, where he still put up some pretty solid numbers, and you can get that for a full 17 slate of games plus some playoff games, I really like that move there. So I like them kind of being snuck in there at number 10. There was a couple other notables that I was interested in seeing where they were. The Bengals at number 11. I'm not really sure I like that one because while it's exciting that T. Higgins is back, Jamar Chase is now extended, and it sounds like they're going to get a deal done with Trey Hendrickson because as of the moment I'm recording this, he is not yet re-signed. Them at number 11 it's not really doing it for me. I feel like that is a little bit high just because of the fact that they still don't really have a defense and have not really done enough to that defense to make me feel better about it. I mean, other than adding Oren Burks this offseason, there's just not a ton that I'm super pumped about with the defensive side of the football, and you're allocating so much money, and we'll talk about this later, to 3 guys on offense and potentially now 1 defensive player who you allowed to seek a trade, but it seems like he's not going anywhere at this point. I just don't know if 11 is the right spot for them, and maybe I'd have them a few spots lower. Like, again, right outside the playoffs looking in ranking type deal, something along the lines of like 15, 16. But the offense is so high, I can understand why somebody might have them at 11, but it's just something I'm not super sold on. The Bears at number 16, they also moved up 6 spots in the power rankings that Eric Edholm put together from the previous one he did, I believe, post-Super Bowl. Now, This one is one of those just like, I'm so scared because this is buying into the hype type of like movement here for the Bears at number 16. I like the spot that they are, but to see such a significant jump because they added... And I mean, don't get me wrong. I really like what the Chicago Bears have done so far this offseason. The addition of Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney alone really have me excited to see what they're going to do. But this is just one of those, is this the fool's gold thing we're going to deal with again, where the Bears at this point now feel like they've won the offseason 3 years in a row. The hype machine is starting to build again. Is that where that's coming from? Having jumped from 22 now to number 16 in this recent edition of the Power Rankings. Just some interesting stuff overall there. And then the 49ers at number 18. Now, my gripe is more so about the fact that this team moved up 3 spots despite having what felt like 20 players depart from the team this free agency and just this offseason as a whole through trades and just free agency. So I don't really know if I like the fact that San Fran moved up 3 spots. Maybe it had more to do with just some of the other teams dropping below them, but you see the trade with Deebo Samuel and the amount of players that were just allowed to walk in free agency. The 49ers being a team that ranks somewhere along the lines of like 20th in the NFL, especially after a 6-win season, I don't really see them deserving of being much higher than that. And yeah, you could say, oh, well, it's a reset. Last year doesn't count, and now they're healthy. So, I get that conversation. I understand that argument. But based off of what we got from this team last year and just the lack of adding to this team so far this offseason, I mean, unless we're expecting like 11 guys to step into starting roles and be better than the guys that departed last season, like that just feels like a very high expectation in my eyes. So it's not so much about them being ranked at number 18. I'm just confused about the fact of them moving up 3 spots despite what we've seen from them this offseason. And then just to round out the bottom 5 here, because I think this is an interesting conversation to have here. In order from 28 down to number 32, the Saints are at 28, the Browns are at 29, the Jaguars at 30, the Giants at 31, and then the Titans sitting there at the lowly number 32 spot. I don't really have much to argue with on this one either. I mean, the only thing I would say is maybe I would put the Browns at 31 and slot up the Jaguars and Giants one. I feel like for me right now, just with where everything is going with Cleveland, it has... like you could put them at 32 and I wouldn't probably argue with you about it right now. The Deshaun Watson situation coupled with just, having to fork over the $40 million guaranteed per year, or not $40 million guaranteed per year, but $40 million AAV that you're giving now to Myles Garrett, who, don't get me wrong, deserves every penny of it, but just where that roster situation currently stands right now, this is a Browns team that is far from being anywhere near contention. And I mean, that's probably the one gripe I have. I mean, I don't have too much to argue about it, just maybe them a little bit lower, but I'm just so out on the Browns after this past season that anything higher than 32 or 31 just feels too high for me, even if they're only 2 spots ahead of that, sitting at number 29. But those are the Power Rankings on NFL.com. Highly recommend you check them out. Just some of my thoughts. Figured we could go through some of the notables and things that I saw on there. Overall, as far as the top is concerned, Eagles at 1, Chiefs at 2, Ravens at 3, Bills at 4, Lions 5. Like just that top 5 alone. I mean, you could maybe slightly organize it differently, but I don't really have any gripes with the way either of those teams finished the year and where they finished the year, and that being the top 5 there. Like if I was to just throw a top 5 together, it probably would have looked something similar to that. Maybe I'd slot the Bills over the Ravens, and that's about it. But other than that, I think an overall pretty solid list from top to bottom when I was looking through. I didn't have a ton to argue about. Second thing we got to get into here, and this is just a very interesting conversation that was being had, and I don't really know what is going on, but after doing some digging, looking at where wide receiver needy teams are at the top of the draft, I think I have an answer to this all. Now, first, we'll just talk about the discussion surrounding the actual 40 time of Tet McMillan. So we'll take a look at this first tweet here, and I've got to say, I don't really know what is going on with I don't want to say it's like misinformation, but just the conversation surrounding what the actual 40 time from his pro day was. So Jordan Schultz went out, and I feel like he was probably the first person to say something about it. He goes, Arizona wide receiver and projected top pick Tetairoa McMillan had his pro day today, where scouts in attendance clocked him at a 4.48 40-yard dash. The 6'4", 219-pound first-team All-American had 24 NFL teams in attendance to watch him. Per source, 24 teams is a lot of teams for a pro day, but he is considered wide receiver 1 if you consider Travis Hunter to be cornerback number 1, and then I guess he would be wide receiver 2 if you consider Travis Hunter to be wide receiver number 1, just depending on what team ends up picking him and what they decide to do with him type deal, or depending on who you are talking to and where they would put everybody. I mean, I know a lot of people might just have Travis Hunter as wide receiver 1, corner number 1, but like Tet's like the true wide receiver number 1 in terms of just the uncertainty surrounding whatever Travis Hunter is supposed to play at the next level. Then the other tweet that I have for you all here, this one coming from Albert Breer. Pro day season is in full swing. An Arizona wide receiver, Tet McMillan, had his workout today. McMillan ran just one 40-yard dash. Just one. It was hand-timed at 4.54, 4.55, and 4.57 on the stopwatches of 3 teams I talked to. Workout was good otherwise, big-bodied guy, so times were expected. Now, this is where the conversation starts to come up for me, and this is where the idea started rolling in my head, is how could there be a near 10th of a second discrepancy? And I even saw some people throwing around something as high as like 4.58, 4.59. How could there be such a wide discrepancy in the times? And I mean, obviously, human error is a real thing, but I mean, a whole 10th of a second is a long time in terms of a 40-yard dash. So there had to be people either sleeping on the stopwatch or could we possibly be seeing some of those wide receiver needy teams trying to make his pro day look just a little less impressive in hopes that maybe he slips down the board? Now, there are a handful of teams, especially towards like the top half of the draft, that could definitely use Tet McMillan's services and would love to be able to draft him, especially if the spot on the draft board is right. Now, we'll start with the team that pops up first. We'll kind of go like in order of the picking. Patriots. They could definitely use a talent like Tet McMillan. Do not get me wrong. That team is devoid of talent at wide receiver. They absolutely need a number 1. And I do think that if Travis Hunter is not available to them and Abdul Carter is not available to them, they should be in on the Tet McMillan sweepstakes. But here's the thing. I don't think anyone's really sold on drafting Tet McMillan number 4. There's also the offensive line conversation right now, and if they should go after Will Campbell, if Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are both off the board. So the conversation is everywhere in New England. But I do think a lot of people feel hesitant about drafting Tet McMillan at number 4. But there is the conversation that I've seen, I have heard, I have witnessed myself, I've even produced myself at my day job, about being able to trade back and then still landing Tet McMillan if the position is right, if the compensation is right, and if the trade back doesn't result in them end up losing him. So there is that conversation to be had. Then, just a few picks behind them at number 6, the Raiders. Now, the Raiders went ahead, made a big trade, swung big, got Geno Smith in the room. Pete Carroll's obviously taken over as head coach over there as well. You already have 2 strong receiving threats in Jacoby Myers, who cracked 1,000 yards this season, Brock Bowers, rookie phenom, all-pro tight end, his first season in the NFL. If you go out there and you draft Tet McMillan at number 6, like you stay put, you don't trade up for a quarterback or anything like that, you're truly going to roll with Geno Smith for like the next 2 or 3 years so you don't have that pressure anymore to go draft a quarterback. Well, you bring in a Tet McMillan, yeah, the running game is not ideal, and I do think that Ashton Genty would be not a bad option for the Raiders to be looking into, even if they were like maybe to trade back from like 6 to 8, 9, 10, something like that, get a couple extra picks, and then draft him because they don't have a running game over there. That is also a viable option, but if you want to go the receiver route, at number 6, Tet McMillan, after you watch a Will Campbell go off the board, a Travis Hunter go off the board, an Abdul Carter go off the board, and assuming like 2, maybe 3 quarterbacks go off, or 2 quarterbacks go off the board before you're picking, potentially 3, depending on what happens. I like the idea of Tet McMillan there. You put yourself into a situation where you have a 3-headed receiving monster to work with for Geno Smith. I would say that is conducive of a productive season on Smith's end, so I would be all in on that. You go back a few more picks, sitting at number 9, you're looking at the Saints. Now, this is where it starts to make more sense, I would say, in terms of teams starting to be like, no, he didn't run a 4.48. He ran a 4.57, 4.58, 4.59, something like that. This is where those numbers coming out start to make more sense to me, because you're starting to pick now at the back of the top 10. Maybe he's out of your reach, just kind of depends on what happens in front of you. Offense could absolutely use a shot in the arm in New Orleans. Alvin Kamara is obviously only getting older. Chris Olave, young, talented wide receiver. The concussion issues are something you just quite simply can't ignore at this stage in his career. And then on top of that, this is a team that, because of the way they're doing their cap numbers every single season, it feels like we just watch talent leave and they don't really have the opportunity to bring people in. They do rely heavily on the draft to kind of replenish their roster every single year, because they're simply not able to spend during free agency, because they spend the entire lead up going into free agency just trying to get themselves like $100,000 under the cap number. I mean, it feels like every offseason these guys jump into it like negative 60, 70, 80 million over the cap, and they have to just kick the can down the road every single season. And I thought that this would be the year that maybe they would go for a full-blown reset and stop doing that, but nope, they're gung-ho on doing it. So for a team picking at number 9, who in my eyes could use, again, a shot in the arm on offense, give Derek Carr another receiving threat, help that room get a little bit more talented, this is a group that I think would really benefit from A, drafting Tet McMillan, but B, also putting out that maybe his 40 time was a little bit slower than what some of those faster times are trying to say. Like, there feels like there could be some gamesmanship here. And then you push a little bit further back in the draft, and this is one that I'm a little bit more out on, but it was a note that I had put in prior to the Cooper Kupp trade. The Seahawks at number 18, I saw a lot of mock drafts at one time pushing the Seahawks at 18, drafting Tet McMillan and watching him fall that whole way, and I think a lot of that had to do with just 40-yard dash time conversation and just how fast of a receiver he actually was. And seeing him land at the Seahawks at number 18 is definitely something that would be interesting, but I think only happens if teams are really out on Tet because he's just not quite fast enough, or they feel that maybe he's not quite fast enough. And that is where you get further into that conversation of teams putting out a slower 40-yard dash on their end just to maybe muddy the waters a little bit and go, and, you know, maybe force a team to question whoever it was that had that stopwatch that clocked the 4.5, the 4.48, the 4.49, whatever the number seems to be right now. Because again, you take a look around on social media, there's a lot of numbers flying around based off of what Tet McMillan got. And again, the highest I think I saw was 4.59. And Jordan Schultz, the tweet we showed earlier, obviously showing 4.48. That is technically, 0.11 of a difference in time altogether. So, I mean, if there's gamesmanship going on, I think it's pretty apparent. I just don't think, and again, human error is a real thing. I get that, but in this game that the NFL plays during this time of year, where people are saying things through closed doors, back channeling stuff, trying to get guys' stock to fall so they can get guys to land at them. Yes, human error is a real thing, but at the same time, if a team like the Saints, like the Seahawks, maybe someone between number 9 and number 18 that's interested in getting Tet McMillan but feels like, we're probably not going to get him because he's going to go too high, are just leaking out lower 40-yard dash times to maybe sway some people's opinions, well, would not be too surprised. Third topic of discussion we got to dive into here. And this one, obviously, was a heavy discussion topic for the duration of the offseason, it feels like, for Cincinnati. And that is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals finally locking up both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase on long-term extensions here. We got the exclusive report from Jordan Schultz. Late on Sunday night? I think it was like 10:30 p.m. or something like that when I saw that pop up on my feed. Bengals wide receiver Jamar Chase and T. Higgins exclusively tell me they've agreed to contract extensions with the team. Jamar Chase getting a 4-year, $161 million deal with $112 million guaranteed, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Props to Cincinnati for paying that large number. And then T. Higgins getting 4 years, $115 million in the first 2 years guaranteed, making him the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. So some big numbers there for two guys that, in my eyes, deserve every penny that they're getting. I can't believe how long it took for them to get here. And now, when you look at these numbers, with $40.25 million in AAV for Jamar Chase, and then T. Higgins raking in another $28.75 million, you're looking at damn near $70 million altogether being thrown away yearly, not thrown away, but being given to two wide receivers on your roster alone. Now, I'm excited to see that Cincinnati was able to get this done. There was a piece of me that felt like maybe there was a chance that at some point the contract with T. Higgins was just going to break down and that was not going to work, and they would maybe just opt to trade him away and see what they could do with him there. But when it came out that they share the same agent, they're being represented by the same guy, and if one guy's deal doesn't get done, the other guy's deal doesn't get done, I was like, okay, blood's in the water. End is near. This is obviously going to wind up with both these guys staying in Cincinnati. So once that came out and that was made apparent, I was like, all right, great. So they're going to figure it out at some point. I genuinely just wish that Cincinnati was quicker on their feet with this one here. Like, they could have signed Jamar Chase to something last year that probably ends up being lower than this number that they gave him. Same thing with T. Higgins. They just dragged their feet. And my concern now is that this is going to affect the rest of the roster. Because when you look at what still needs to be done, I'm assuming there's going to have to be some sort of restructuring on Joe Burrow's end to make his contract work with the rest of the team. And of course, these two big contracts now as well. And that seems like something they've alluded to enough. But you also still need to restructure extend Trey Hendrickson, who led the NFL in sacks in 2024 with 17.5 on a defense that, and this works in his favor, on a defense that besides him could literally not generate pressure and could not accumulate sacks. He was like the one guy on defense when it came to rushing the passer that did literally anything. So you have Hendrickson now leading the league in sacks and was the sole guy creating all those sacks and pressures alone on your defense. The ball is in his court, and he's going to work with it. And, I mean, you see what Max Crosby saw. 3-year, $106.5 million deal, $91.5 million guaranteed. The AAV on that one's $35.5 million. Myles Garrett, not too long after, resetting the market again, which is the reason why Jamar Chase is now making $40.25 million a year. You had Myles Garrett, 4-year, $160, $123.45 million guaranteed, which I thought was kind of funny that it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, of course, AAV, $40 million a year. You now are going to be put into the situation where Joe Burrow's making $55 million a year. Jamar Chase, $40.25 million a year. T. Higgins, $28.75 million a year. These are some big numbers here. And then just using a Spotrac estimate for the sake of having a number here, Trey Hendrickson's fair value or market value number currently listed at $31.5 million a year. Again, that's the Spotrac estimate there. We're looking at $155.5 million in AAV to just 4 players on your roster. And I know AAV, salary cap, not the same thing. You can do some stuff to make the salary cap number work, but just to give you an idea, that's more than half of what the salary cap allowance is per year. Like, yes, you can add void years to move that money around a bit and make that all work, but that is the reality of it. You were paying $155.5 million based off those 4 numbers. And that number could even be higher. Like, if Trey Hendrickson locks in something in between Myles Garrett and Max Crosby, or maybe slightly lower, like that number starts to push and tick closer towards $160 million to 4 individual players. At some point, that's going to leak down in the spending on the rest of the roster, and that is where my concern lies with this. And that was my biggest issue from the jump with all of this. It wasn't that I didn't want to see T. Higgins staying in Cincinnati. I'm excited because this means that the Bengals offense is going to be must-see, especially if they can figure out that run game, because, things were a little bit rocky on the ground. Thankfully, Chase Brown started to look really good because the Zach Moss experiment was not really going too well. But now Cincinnati is in the situation where you have so much money tied up into 4 guys, and the defensive side of the ball struggled so much last year that you're going to have to hope that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow can lead your team to 35-plus points a game every single week. You are going to have your fingers crossed that is possible. Joe Burrow's going to have to, and don't get me wrong, Joe Burrow in my eyes has proved his worth and then some, every single penny of it, but he's going to have to keep doing it week in and week out, as long as all these guys are making all this kind of money, because I just can't really envision a way where you're going to be throwing that much more money at the defense at this point beyond Trey Hendrickson because of how much is just going to be tied up on these 4 players alone. Like, it is a wildly high number. And I know that's the state of the NFL right now. It's the way things are going, but you could have had these guys at lower numbers, and you're probably working with an extra $10 million or so a year, give or take, depending on when you actually handed out these extensions. And it just feels like Cincinnati just dragged their feet. That's probably my issue. That's basically where this whole rant is going, is that I wish for the sake of the team and the build of the roster, they could have got this done sooner. That's all I really would have liked to see from Cincinnati out of all this entire situation. And honestly, I will say at the end of this, like, I'm surprised that we are where we are right now, where we have both wide receivers staying in Cincinnati. On top of that, it seems like the Trey Hendrickson deal is going to get done. I really thought there was going to be a situation where, at the very least, Trey Hendrickson was going to be gone. And there was even a point where I thought, maybe they ultimately just cut their losses and say goodbye to Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins and just recoup the picks and try to rebuild the roster this way, because the defense needs a lot of help. So look to the draft. That's probably going to be where a lot of defensive players fly off the board for the Cincinnati Bengals. But overall, again, I'm surprised, excited, looking forward to seeing what Cincinnati does. But quite a roller coaster, I guess you could say, to summarize the ride getting from point A to point B, which is everyone is apparently getting extended in Cincy and not going anywhere. And then last but certainly not least, we do have to get into this discussion here, because there are some teams that could really use the services of former Viking center Garrett Bradbury. He was released, and this is one that obviously a lot of people saw coming here. As you can see the tweet from Tom Pelissero, he's currently scheduled to be released as a post-June 1st designation. That'll help Minnesota with the salary cap there, coming out per He and Rap Sheet. They were trying to trade him, and ultimately they were not able to get that done, so they went for the release. And this was something that, again, no surprise there. Everyone knew that this was coming. This was something that was basically announced well in advance of this, I think like 3 or 4 days prior to the fact of it actually happening. So this was something that we all kind of saw coming here. And after 6 seasons and 88 starts for the Minnesota Vikings, he is now looking for a new home. Now, 2024 wasn't exactly Garrett Bradbury's best season. PFF credited him with the most sacks that he's allowed since 2020, with only 4, so the number's not monumentally high, but it's the pressures that are really starting to worry people. And it's actually kind of the situation that Cam Robinson finds himself in, the left tackle that is also available in free agency right now, that a lot of people have like pinned towards like the Patriots or something like that. The amount of pressures that he let up last season is something that I think is a bit of a pain point. There's also conversation about just, how he's going to act after, which again, I don't like getting into character issues with players and whatnot, and just conversations around that altogether. So that is a piece of it as well. But the pressures thing is what really sticks out to me, because he's coming off a career high 37 pressures. Again, all these numbers coming from PFF. You do with those numbers what you will. The Vikings went ahead, they addressed the offensive line, especially the interior side of things, going after both former Colts, Ryan Kelly, the center, and then guard Will Fries. So this was odd man out situation. This was always going to come here. Clearly they wanted to get better at the position. But with that all being said, there are teams that I think fit perfectly with Garrett Bradbury and should probably consider going out and getting him. And if he lands with either of the 3 teams I'm going to talk about here in a second, I would not be surprised, because at the end of the day, this is a former first-round pick. This is somebody who, again, shows that he can get it done in the NFL. And yes, not his best season, struggled a bit in pass protection, but maybe a new, change of scenery, new scheme, new head coach, new offensive line to work on. Maybe it reinvigorates him. Maybe it helps him fix maybe some issues that were popping up last season. Who knows? But the first team I'm looking at here, I think Chicago, very good possibility that maybe they go and target him. Now, they've already shown a strong willingness to go after offensive linemen, whether it was via trade, because they obviously went out and got themselves both Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson. So they've been aggressive on the offensive line front altogether. There is a piece of me, though, that feels like because of how aggressive they've already been, maybe they opt to use the draft and go after a center that way. However, the offensive line struggled so much in Chicago last year that if they want to just go, 3 vets, swap out the entire interior and we go from there, maybe they could still double dip and draft a center as well to work behind Garrett Bradbury just in case that signing doesn't work. Those options are all on the table the way I see it. And especially with the way that they've wheeled and dealed in Chicago, I think they could make something like that happen. The Patriots, they're another good fit for this one here after just releasing center David Andrews themselves not too long ago. This one seems a lot more likely in my eyes, and honestly, Garrett Bradbury feels like the kind of fit that would make sense for Mike Vrabel's offense. Cole Strange was getting some work at center last season, and for me, I just feel like that whole Cole Strange experiment has not really gone well. Injuries and just being drafted too high while Bill Belichick was still there. that's one of those things where I feel like it would only help him to just keep him at the guard spot, and it would help your offensive line to just keep him at the position he has been playing his entire career. Have him stick back at guard. You go and you bring in a Garrett Bradbury, and that at least answers some questions along an offensive line that basically at this current point is Mike Onwenu and Morgan Moses on the right side. Your entire, from the center to the left, is a giant mystery. So if you can go out and get an experienced guy like Garrett Bradbury, I would feel a little bit better about the current state of the O-line. They have not been able to address it despite trying to so far this offseason as well. So going into the draft, this feels like a logical move where, again, you could find yourself double dipping in this situation as well. You go ahead and you bring in Garrett Bradbury, and then maybe in day 2, day 3, you're going after a center in the draft regardless to beef up the depth of the offensive line, because that's a whole group that needs work. Beyond just the starters, the depth behind the starters as well is by no means perfect either. So there's plenty of guys that can be added here between now and the draft. So wouldn't be shocked to see them maybe target him there as well. And then, of course, the Seahawks are another team that I look at and I go, okay, this one would make a lot of sense here. Their first choice at center last year literally retired in the middle of the season. So there is that with Connor Williams. That happened, and that obviously did not help an offensive line that over the last handful of years has struggled to pass protect altogether. And the way I see it right now, this is where the Seattle Seahawks need to get a little bit more aggressive along the offensive line, because you went and got yourself Sam Darnold. And don't get me wrong, Sam Darnold, really exciting. This is one of those guys that it's going to go one of two ways. The career resurgence is real, and he's going to continue to trend forward. Maybe he's, very similar to the Geno Smith situation where he's found himself, and now he'll be able to be a good quarterback that can start for you in the NFL. However, those last 2 games, and we've talked about this enough on this show, are a bit of a concern. If you cannot protect Sam Darnold, and that pressure is as hot as it has been in Seattle for the last 3-4 years, going back to before even Geno Smith took over and Russell Wilson was still here. And I know people like to blame how long Russell Wilson holds the ball for. That's fair, but pass protection has not really been great in Seattle for some time now. If it looks anything like it has over the last few seasons with Geno Smith, who I don't think gets enough credit for doing what he was able to do despite how leaky the offensive line was at times, you are not going to get the Sam Darnold that played for the first, 16 games of the season. You're going to get the Sam Darnold of the final regular season game into that playoff loss that they had, which is basically what you got from the Jets, seeing ghost type deal. And you're not looking at a successful offense next season, despite the fact that you went and got Cooper Kupp and have reworked your offense a little bit. He needs to be protected. He needs to be comfortable. So, again, Garrett Bradbury, just in my eyes, poses a solid option to help fortify the interior of an offensive line that definitely needs some help there. So, interesting to see what happens with Garrett Bradbury. This is one of those more low-key kind of releases, but, when I look at center, one of the more important positions in football that gets overlooked, because it's the guy that literally touches the ball every single play that isn't the quarterback. And having communication with your quarterback is key. Having great communication is even more key. And on top of that, again, it all starts with the center. They're the ones that make the checks at the line of scrimmage. They change protections if need be. They're the ones in constant communication with the quarterback. That is one of those positions that you can't really sleep on, and you can't really whiff on either. So Garrett Bradbury to either one of these 3 teams, in my eyes, is an upgrade and makes a ton of sense here. But that's basically everything I got for you all today. So if you made it to the end, as always, I greatly appreciate it. We'll have another episode coming out on Friday. So as always, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.